Okay, so let's try to do a roast on popper. We're going to be roasting 100 grams of Guatemala organic Huehue Tenango. And the first thing we need to do is remove the top. Let me show you the top again. So it's a transparent plastic that's a high heat type, and that gives it a slight yellowish cast. However, we always recommend to roast with a strong light looking down into the roast chamber. Those are available from various places. You can use a phone light pretty well, but you don't want to leave it there because that surface is too hot for your phone. And the chaff collector, which I've mentioned, does tend to leak, 2-3% of very fine chaff particles. So it's not 100%, but we needed to maintain this larger air hole size to keep the flow of air exiting the roaster. It has that great Darth Vader snorkel on the bottom, etc. It's hinged and held in place by magnets when you close it. Now, for the purpose of a demonstration where we can really see inside the roast chamber, I'm going to have to roast without the top on, and that's totally fine. It just means the chaff is going to go everywhere and make a kind of a mess. But if you want to do that outside, that's great. We haven't really noticed that there's a huge difference between the air restriction of the top and having it just sort of flow out. It doesn't seem to affect the roast that much, oddly. But anyway, let's check this out. So the first thing to do is to set our roaster. We're at 0, our green light's on. We can put our heat where we want it, and I recommend starting at 2, a little bit on the hot side. I almost never use the 3 o'clock position. That's just kind of way too hot. And you want to, you want to use the whole. If you want to roast to the default, the 7 minutes that's included, which I think can create a very nice roast, you really want to start a little bit hotter and bring your temperature down as you roast in order to have a nice controlled finish on your roast. So let's go ahead and load up our coffee. As you can see, the roast chamber here is a typical type for an air popcorn popper. Has a flat bottom with the vents around the side, and that's called a cyclonic roast action. It's a cyclonic oven. It's used in other technologies, and it's used in some professional coffee roasters as well. So we load up our 100 grams. And to start our roast, we can just turn our dial slightly to the counterclockwise. It's really important right off the bat that we see good rotation of the green coffee. And this is adequate. This is pretty good rotation that we're seeing right here. If your green coffee isn't spinning right off the bat, you're going to start to roast unevenly. That coffee being held at the bottom is going to start to roast faster than the coffee at the top. But this looks quite good. And let me just describe a few other things. I mentioned having a good strong light source from above, which is really important. So if you can find something, I've used these sort of snake lights from IKEA. There's these ring lights that are used actually for selfies, and they have an attachment for your phone. Those are actually really good white light, and they're very reasonably priced. Another thing about just chaff collector, though we're not using it, is you need to empty the chaff basket every single time after you roast, absolutely. A problem with roasting without it is that your chaff falls around your roaster, and your air intake is in the bottom of the roaster, so that's not totally ideal. You really want to keep the chaff away from that so it doesn't get sucked back into the machine. That doesn't tend to happen unless you really neglect it for multiple roasts. So let's see how our development is. We're now just past 1 minute 30 seconds, so 8:30 on the clock means 1 minute and 30 seconds. That's where you got to do a little math. I'm going to go ahead and start bringing my temperature down just a little to 1 o'clock because I may draw this roast out beyond the 7 minutes roast time. I want this to go a little bit slow. Let this go a little bit lower. I see good rotation there. it's nice when you see the spinning and bubbling. Obviously, the coffee loses weight fairly quickly. That's the first thing that comes out of coffee is moisture content, and that allows it to spin more freely, and it starts to enlarge and sort of raise up in the roast chamber. Another thing about the popper is it's kind of large. The total with the roast chamber is almost 16 inches tall. The reason for that was to create stability in the base, but also our roast chamber is quite a bit taller than the air popper roast chambers, because the popper, you want the thing that you're cooking, your popcorn, to exit the roaster. Here you want to hold it in the roaster. So we have to kind of create a taller overall outside design to accommodate that. See some really good, nice browning going on. And we just passed 4 minutes of roasting. I'm sorry, we just passed 3 minutes of roasting. Somebody can't do their math today. Just add a little more temperature here. And of course, there's no data logging here. There's no USB connection. There's no app that's recording your roast for you. But you could do that yourself really easily. You could make adjustments and make a roast log note on paper with a pen. So I hear a little bit of first crack as we're approaching 4 minutes. It's a little bit fast, so I'm going to bring us down to 12 noon. And you know, the first pop of first crack doesn't mean the coffee is in first crack. Those tend to be outliers, and we're not in the midst of first crack yet. We're getting there though. Now, air roasting of any kind, whether it's fluidized bed or this type, which is cyclonic air roasting, is faster than the roasting that you would hear like at your local coffee roaster that has a drum roaster and roast for 12 or 15 minutes, let's say. Air roasting is faster by nature because the thermal transfer is so much more rapid. And if you roast for 15 minutes in an air roaster, you'll tend to get a very flat tasting coffee. So repeating what they do in some other roast technology with an air roaster isn't really always the best idea. That said, what's cool about this popper roaster is that you can really use it for espresso and get a kind of a flatter roast profile in terms of acidity, that more developed sort of bittering and bittersweet notes that are favorable in espresso. And you can do that by just being gentle in your roast curve and allowing your roast to progress a little slower. So now we're at 4:30, and on the dial, which is 5 minutes and 30 seconds. We have 1 minute and 30 left. This is the point where I like to be actually really into the center of first crack. So in order to ensure that, I'm actually going to lower the heat. And you can see that the coffee's still rotating quite well. So I'll use the low setting at this point to get myself into the full first crack temperature. Sort of had some errant first crack and then left it. So we're going to push this a little bit into first crack, and then I can go back to high airflow if I choose to. There you can hear it. What I'm going to do is just go diminish my heat a little bit, because we only have 20 seconds left in the roast, and I think this is actually going to be a perfect light roast. It's going to be a very nice city, basic city roast. So there we've pretty much finished first crack. And we're going into cooling at 3 minutes, so I'm just going to leave that as it is. But I think this roaster is really cool. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and top back on. I mean, what's really neat is it allows you to dynamically change and play around with the roast, just like, more like if you were cooking on a stove top and you're sauteing something and you're like, oh, I want to turn the heat up, I want to turn the heat down, I want to spin it a little more. And it becomes a kind of more fluid and organic process than roasting with a computer where you're saying, I want to hit these exact roast points. And I stop the roasting, and I can do this without upsetting my camera. So to get your coffee out, you have to invert the roaster. There's no fancy way to do that. Let's take a look at this. Hopefully that's in focus. A very nice city roast there. Very even. Of course, in this roast, I didn't add extra time and continue roasting, but I could have done that very easily just by spinning the knob clockwise, and we could have roasted 10 minutes if that's the profile I wanted. The two basic profiles that I really like are to roast within the 7 minutes, aiming for first crack starting at 5 minutes 30 seconds, which is 4 minutes 30 seconds on the dial, and then giving 1.5 minutes of development to get through first crack and to finish. And that's basically what we did here. This was a little bit off in some ways. And the second thing I really like to do is something around 9 to 10 minutes, more for espresso. And in that, I'm actually targeting a 7 minute, using that full initial first roast time for first crack, and then adding 2 to 3 minutes extra for development. So first crack around 7 minutes, and then further development to create a kind of a balanced, espresso-like profile. So anyway, this is the Papa Roaster, and like I said, the idea is a reasonably priced roaster with good user control. Thanks a lot.